Of all the miracles claimed in the annals of religion, one stands alone in its significance. It is not just another story of healing or wonder. It is presented as the cornerstone of reality, the single event upon which the largest faith in the world is built. The Apostle Paul, one of Christianity's earliest and most influential thinkers, understood this with stark clarity. In his first letter to the Corinthians, written just 2 decades after the event, he made an astonishing admission. "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins." There is no ambiguity here. Paul frames the resurrection of Jesus not as a metaphor or a spiritual idea, but as a historical fact of supreme importance. If it did not happen, he argues, the entire Christian project collapses into a pathetic and pointless delusion. For 2,000 years, believers have accepted this event as the ultimate proof of Jesus' divinity and the promise of their own immortality. But can this claim withstand scrutiny? Can we, and should we, examine the story of the empty tomb not as an article of faith to be accepted, but as a historical claim to be investigated? This video is that investigation. We will peel back the layers of dogma and tradition to look at the evidence we actually have, the texts themselves, to ask what we can plausibly know about the events that transpired in Judea in the year 30. When a historian investigates an event from antiquity, they begin with the earliest and best sources. In the case of the resurrection, this is not, as many assume, the Gospels. It is the letters of the Apostle Paul. His first letter to the Corinthians contains the absolute earliest account we have of post-resurrection appearances, written around the year 55. Here, Paul quotes an even earlier creed that he says he received, a creed that scholars believe dates to within 3 to 5 years of Jesus' crucifixion. It states that Christ died, was buried, was raised on the 3rd day, and then appeared to Cephas, Peter, then to the 12, then to more than 500 brothers, then to James, then to all the apostles, and finally to Paul himself. This is the bedrock, the earliest kernel of belief. Yet, we must notice what is conspicuously absent. Paul says nothing about an empty tomb. He never mentions women discovering it. He describes no angels, no earthquakes, no terrified guards. He simply lists a series of appearances. Crucially, Paul equates the appearances to others with his own experience, which he describes elsewhere not as a meeting with a resuscitated corpse, but as a blinding, heavenly vision on the road to Damascus. For Paul, the earliest witness, the resurrection appears to have been a spiritual visionary event, a belief that God had exalted the crucified Jesus to heaven, not necessarily the physical resuscitation of a body from a grave. The silence from our earliest source on the very details that would later define the story is deafening. The first narrative account of the empty tomb does not appear until much later, around the year 70, with the Gospel of Mark. Mark's telling is famously abrupt, strange, and terrifying. In his version, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome go to the tomb on Sunday morning to anoint Jesus' body. They find the stone rolled away. Entering the tomb, they do not see Jesus, but a young man in a white robe who tells them that Jesus has risen and that they should tell the disciples to meet him in Galilee. And here we come to the original ending of the Gospel, the ending that exists in our oldest and most reliable manuscripts. How do the women react to this glorious news? The text says, "Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid." And that is where the story ends. It is an ending of fear, confusion, and failure. The women are given a command and, out of sheer terror, they fail to obey it. There are no triumphant appearances of Jesus, no joyful reunion, no great commission. There is only awestruck terror and silence This ambiguous and unsettling conclusion proved so unsatisfying to later Christians that scribes took it upon themselves to fix it, attaching longer, more triumphant endings. Endings that are not found in our earliest copies. These later editions, which describe Jesus appearing to Mary and the disciples, are a testament to the evolving story. They are the first and most obvious example of human hands editing the sacred text to make a difficult story more palatable and theologically useful. The authors of Matthew and Luke, writing 10 to 20 years after Mark and clearly using his gospel as a source, took it upon themselves to fix his problematic ending and expand the narrative dramatically. Each author shapes the story to fit their own unique theological agenda. Matthew, writing for a Jewish audience and keen to counter accusations that the disciples had stolen the body, adds a series of spectacular apologetic details. He invents the story of Pilate assigning guards to watch over the tomb. On Sunday morning, he adds a great earthquake and a dazzling angel who descends from heaven, rolls back the stone and sits upon it, causing the terrified guards to faint. In Matthew's version, the women are not silent. They run away with fear and great joy, and Jesus himself appears to them on the road. Luke, on the other hand, crafts a different scene. He removes the single young man and replaces him with two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning. He omits any appearance in Galilee, grounding all the events firmly in Jerusalem. Most famously, Luke adds the story of Jesus appearing to two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and later to the disciples in a locked room. In this scene, to combat early beliefs that Jesus was merely a spirit or phantom, Luke has Jesus explicitly ask for food, and he eats a piece of broiled fish to prove his physicality. The story is clearly growing in the telling, becoming more spectacular, more triumphant, and more physically concrete with each new author. Finally, we come to the Gospel of John, written at the end of the 1st century, the latest and most theologically developed of the canonical Gospels. John's account is so different from the others that it is almost impossible to harmonize. In his version, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb alone, while it is still dark. Seeing the stone removed, she doesn't look inside but immediately runs to tell Peter and the beloved disciple. They race to the tomb, look inside, and then leave, confused. It is only after they are gone that Mary, weeping alone outside the tomb, looks in and sees two angels. Then, Jesus himself appears to her, though she initially mistakes him for the gardener. Later, Jesus appears to the disciples in a locked room, but this time, John adds the famous story of doubting Thomas, who was absent from the first appearance. An entire week later, Jesus appears again, specifically so that Thomas can touch his wounds and believe. Beyond the different characters and sequence, John also presents a different timeline for the crucifixion itself, placing Jesus' death on the day of preparation for the Passover, directly contradicting the Synoptic Gospels, which place it after the Passover meal. These are not minor variations. If 4 witnesses to a modern crime gave such wildly different and mutually exclusive accounts of the key events, their collective testimony would be dismissed as unreliable. When we step back and assess this evidence from the dispassionate perspective of a secular historian, the problems become immense. The standards of evidence required to establish an ordinary event in antiquity are high. The standards required to establish an unprecedented supernatural miracle are, and should be, astronomically higher. Yet, the evidence for the resurrection is uniquely poor. Our only sources are anonymous texts written in a foreign language in a different country, decades after the events they purport to describe. They were not written by disinterested observers, but by passionate believers, for believing communities, with the explicit theological goal of convincing readers of Jesus' divine status. There are no contemporary, outside accounts, Not a single historian or writer from the first century, not Philo of Alexandria, not Pliny the Elder, not Seneca, mentions this earth-shattering event or the supposed earthquake and rising of the saints in Jerusalem that accompanied it. The sources we do have, the Gospels, are themselves riddled with internal contradictions and clear signs of legendary development. A historian can say, with reasonable confidence, that a Jewish teacher named Jesus was crucified by the Romans in Judea under Pontius Pilate. But the claim that he was physically raised from the dead is not a claim that history can verify. It is a claim that belongs to the realm of faith, not evidence. The story of the empty tomb, when subjected to historical analysis, simply does not hold up. So, if the resurrection is not a verifiable fact of history, what is it? It is best understood as a powerful foundational myth. A myth, in this context, is not a lie or a fairy tale, but a story that a community tells to make sense of a foundational event and to explain its own existence. The earliest Christians had a powerful transformative experience they interpreted as the living presence of Jesus in their lives after his death. This experience, likely visionary in nature as described by Paul, was the catalyst. The stories of the empty tomb and physical appearances were later narratives created to explain and ground that initial, powerful experience of faith. The story evolved from Paul's visionary encounters to Mark's terrifying and silent tomb, to Matthew and Luke's triumphant and physical appearances, to John's highly theological and symbolic encounters. This evolution transformed a story of a shamed and executed failed Messiah into a story of a triumphant victory over death itself. It provided a powerful explanation for the disciples' renewed courage and the explosive growth of the early church. The empty tomb is not a historical report, but a powerful, human-made legend born from grief, hope, and an unshakable belief in the significance of their leader. It is a testament to the profound power of storytelling to create meaning in the face of tragedy, a myth that has shaped the course of human history for 2,000 years.